It's not in my office.
Someone's clock?
Sounds like it.
It's my clock. Okay, well, this is just to keep you in order. When it gets to be 7 o'clock, it's going to get pretty wild in here.
Okay. All right, should we go ahead and start?
Well,
Oh,
since that's the clock gonged, I think so.
Okay.
We're missing Bob and Tony.
Let's
Tony
give
just
it a,
chimed in.
Tony jumped
Oh,
in.
there's Tony. Okay.
Just waiting for Bob. Well, we'll catch Bob up when he joins in. So, Lori, you want to go ahead and get us started?
Sure. We call this Plan Commission meeting to order. This meeting has been given notice in accordance with section 19.83 and 19.84 Wisconsin statutes in such form that will apprise the general public and news media of subject matter that is intended for consideration and action. Roll call shows all members are present except for Chairman Walter and Commissioner Williams. Oh, there he is. He's here.
He popped in.
Okay. A motion would be in order to appoint the chairman pro tem.
So moved.
Who's that?
Give me a name.
Bill? Okay, second?
Second, Millis.
Here, okay. To appoint trustee
Trustee
Baum?
Ball. Trustee Ball.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded to appoint trustee Baum as chairman pro tem. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, that'll bring us to item number 3 on the agenda, public input and public appearance. Please be advised per section 19.84, parent 2, that information will be received from the public. However, no action will be taken at this time. Written public comments should be directed to comments@village.germantown.wi.us by 4 p.m. on Monday, November 30th, so that they can be provided to the members for their consideration. Did we get any comments from anybody today?
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
Nothing came in. All right. Is there anybody online that wishes to address the Plan Commission? Tracy or Bruce, did you want to talk to the Plan Commission about anything?
No, we just wanted to listen in.
Okay. All right. I don't see anybody else looking to chime in, so I will move on to item number 4, new business. Item A, Community Development Department, future land use discussion, neighborhoods, districts, and corridors as part of the Germantown 2050 Comprehensive Plan. General discussion, no action tonight. Okay, Jeff, I will turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you. I want to welcome everybody, the Plan Commission members, members of the general public. I see we have a couple. Also, our consultant, Grafe, represented by Craig Hebner and Danya Littlefield. We'll get into some intros a little bit later, but I want to start off with just a little bit of background. If you recall, our last workshop dedicated to the 2050 plan was back on February 24th. At that time, we discussed the future land use plan map component of our 2050 plan. And the concept of our neighborhood district and corridor concept, where we'll be identifying place-based geographic areas that we ultimately will develop future land use policies to guide future growth and development, and those will be presented in both sort of a map and in a tabular form. Back on our meeting on October 12th, when we first tried to reboot the 2050 plan project after our COVID-induced layoff, we discussed having Grafe work with us in a workshop setting to help us pull together a neighborhood district and corridor map and table that we would be posting on our new social pinpoint platform for public viewing and comment as we lead up to a mid-January community conversation meeting. Since that time, staff has been working on revisions to the NDC map and table, discussed back in February with the Plan Commission members, and staff initiated revisions based on other discussions at Plan Commission and board meetings that we've had since then, to pull together the contents of the map and table that will be the focus of our discussion this evening, and our presentation by Grafe. I just want you to keep in mind that this effort continues to be somewhat of a draft product and subject to change as we move forward, including things as simple as the names that we've picked for our neighborhoods and districts and corridors. So what we want you folks to do tonight, Plan Commission members, is focus on the neighborhood district and corridor component. And we'll be giving you digital copies of both the map and the table within the next week for you to take a closer look at on your own and provide comments and feedback on before our next meeting on December 14th. One last thing before I introduce Craig. We did a run through earlier today, and we noticed that depending upon how you have your screen laid out with your various pictures of everybody attending, and whether you've got the full screen option open or not, you may have some difficulty viewing some of the smaller print. So I would encourage you to adjust your layout and your screen size as we move forward and listen to the presentation. With that said, I'd like to introduce Craig Hebner with Grafe and Danya Littlefield for our discussion this evening. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And maybe before I start talking, just any questions from Plan Commissioners on Jeff's introduction?
No.
Perfect. Well, then I'll share my screen here and pull that up so everyone can start to get comfortable with just viewing the screen that we have up here. So as an introduction again, I think I've met all of you, but my name again is Craig Hebner. I'm serving as the project manager for the comprehensive plan update for the village, as well as the ongoing comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, working with Mark and the village on the Corp update as well. So kind of two projects that are going on right now that Grafe is the acting consultant. As Jeff mentioned, I'm joined here tonight by my colleague Danya Littlefield, who's also a planner here at Grafe and working on both those plans as well. Tonight, I have about 16 slides, and these 16 slides give an overview again to what neighborhoods, districts, and corridors map is, and how we're hoping to utilize that as part of the comprehensive plan update for the village. So I'm going to kind of go through those slides. As I'm presenting, Jeff may interject and give some additional comments. And the hope, I think, is that we can get through these 16 slides and then open it up for conversation after we present everything. As I'm presenting, if there are any comments or questions, there is a chat function, I believe, in WebEx. If you want to jot down any comments or include anything to make sure we circle back to, that would be one option. But if you really can't hold off, feel free to interrupt as well. With that, I'll kick off. And everyone has seen the screen. Can I get a nod?
Yes.
Perfect. So this slide shows what's existing today as far as your plan documents and ordinance. On the left, you can see zoning map, your existing zoning map as of 2019 when we pulled this together. And then the right two images are from your current comprehensive plan. It identifies existing land uses in the middle. And then on the far right, you see the future land use map that currently is part of your comprehensive plan. For the comprehensive plan update, what we're moving towards, as Jeff referenced, is neighborhoods, districts, and corridors map. And this neighborhoods, districts, and corridors map will act as your future land use map. So it's more or less synonymous as far as the tool to guide different zoning decisions, but it's difference is that the neighborhoods, districts, and corridors map is focused much more on defining places and areas within the village versus your current future land use map, which is very parcel specific and lacks a certain sense of identity or placemaking, which is really what we feel very important for both your residents, staff, and you as a plan commission to help guide future zoning and land use decisions within the village. So what's shown on the screen here is an update since you've last seen to the neighborhoods, districts, and corridors map, and I'll dig a little bit into each one here. But what it's showing is 13 different neighborhoods in yellow color there, 11 districts, and they're broken up into kind of sub-districts, 6 industrial, 2 commercial or mixed use, and 3 rural districts, and 2 corridors, and then 1 environmental overlay, which is basically your sewer pack environmental corridors. And what I'll go through in the next couple of slides is kind of an overview of what all these different neighborhoods, districts, and corridors entail. How neighborhoods, districts, and corridors, how the approach works. It's essentially twofold. You have your NDC map, which identifies every single area within the village, and that's teamed with the NDC table. The NDC table is the specific tabular information that quantifies and describes each of the districts and neighborhoods and corridors that are listed on the map. So the table here that you see on the bottom is basically every single listing of whether it's a district, neighborhood, or corridor. And then it goes into what is a preferred land use for those different districts, neighborhoods, and corridors. And how it's broken down is within each area, there's preferred land use categories, which you see here, and other column headers that describe the character or different design regulations that are part of a future land use discussion. And how it's broken up here is you'll see within each district, neighborhood, or corridor, there's either allowable uses, desirable uses, or undesirable uses identified by the A's, the U's, and the D's. So when you look at any future land use, the intent would be that you identify where the property is located within a neighborhood, district, and corridor. You would look then to the table as far as what preferred uses are and identify if it falls within a desirable, allowable, or undesirable use. And then on the right side is additional design regulations, as I mentioned, for the different areas as well that would help guide future zoning decisions. As part of this table, one of the column headers is an environmental corridor overlay. And what this is identifying is within the village, there's sewer pack delineated environmental corridors. A good portion of the village, primarily this is the Menominee River corridor that's identified, but there's other secondary corridors as well. And the inclusion of the environmental corridor overlay is to basically ensure that any environmentally sensitive areas that are worth saving really should be retained as part of the planning process. So what the land use table again will include is this category of environmental corridor, and it will be filled in whether yes or no there's overlap with an environmental corridor. So these next couple slides, I just want to quickly go through a couple example neighborhoods, districts, and corridors to get a sense of how this would potentially work. So this is an example of a neighborhood. We've named this, again, all the names are draft right now. This is the neighborhood with Spassland Park as its center point, so we've labeled this Spassland neighborhood. And what this will include, again, in your comprehensive plan is a page that includes the map of the neighborhood. It will include the table of desirable, allowable, and undesirable uses. And a key part of this as well is a narrative or a description of the desired uses and character. So on the left side here, you see that draft narrative description. And this is something that you as a plan commission, if there's any future development within this neighborhood, would look at these 3 different things: the map, the table, and the character description. So as an example here, I'll just read quickly. The Spassland neighborhood is one of 3 residential neighborhoods located along the southern municipal boundary of Menominee Falls. It describes the general boundaries of the neighborhood. The neighborhood receives its name from the centrally located Spassland Park. The majority of existing land consists of single-family residential uses with pockets of institutional and commercial uses, primarily along Pilgrim and County Line Road. And then the last statement here is residential uses are preferred for this neighborhood along with neighborhood-oriented commercial along entire arterial roadways. So when a development would come up for this neighborhood as an example, you would look at that narrative, you would look at the preferred land uses, and you can see here, if we start with the Ds, which are the desirable, it's really just the single family residential and the open space and recreational, which are really, the preferred desirable uses. But it also allows for some other uses, including the 2 and 3 family, some commercial uses as we've identified along key arterials, and that's where the narrative works together with the land use table. So each neighborhood district and corridor, as I mentioned, will kind of go through this progression of what's preferred, how it's described, and then any specific density or design related items. Within the plan, a key part will also be just describing the character of these neighborhoods, districts, and corridors. So here's just, we include both existing photography or even diagrams or drawings or precedent imagery of what the future could be. So this is just a drone aerial that we pulled together as part of our park planning process. The next example is what we're calling the Village Center District. So this is inclusive of both the Mequon Road and commercial along Mequon Road and the Main Street area within the village. And I won't read this whole thing, but to give you a sense of the direction of the character that we've created thus far is the Village Center serves as the heart or central place within the community. It includes 2 primary circulation routes focused around Mequon Road and Main Street. Future land uses include an emphasis on commercial, high-density residential, mixed-use commercial residential, and memorable public places. A key theme that we're seeing in different retail and commercial corridors in different areas is really this more pedestrian-friendly, destination-based retail, which is oftentimes accompanied with a memorable public space. So what this page is showing is just some example imagery that we would include possibly within the comprehensive plan or just as part of the planning process for what's the desired intent for this village center. You can see the examples here of public spaces surrounded by mixed use retail, commercial, the inclusion of potentially a more splash pad plaza space connected to retail, and then an emphasis on outdoor spaces, seating that are pedestrian friendly. And that's a shift away from kind of the more auto dominant Mequon Road that you see today. The next example is looking at the north side of the village and what we're defining as the Rural Preservation District. The Rural Preservation District includes the majority of land outside of the sewer service area in the northern portion of the village. The majority, or a good majority of this area includes environmental corridors, and the remaining land is either ag land or low density residential. The emphasis that we're proposing moving forward is continued agricultural uses and open space. In order to retain the rural character of this district, we're proposing that the allowance of residential subdivisions are only permitted as a conservation subdivision. So here's where these kind of additional columns as part of the NDC table would jump into consideration, where a conservation subdivision is more of a either requirement or a strong recommendation that could be enforced with new zoning ordinances that we would pass subsequent to the comprehensive plan. The other major change that we're proposing that we'd like to discuss tonight is the recommendation or consideration of a lower density than what currently exists today in this area. So currently it's a 1 unit per 5 residential use, and the consideration for discussion is lowering that density to 1 unit per 20 acres for any individual lots that are part of a CSM. And then if there is a subdivision that's proposed, that you would be allowed 1 unit per 5 acres, but again, with that conservation subdivision mandate as a design. And to give kind of a overview, I think everyone on the Plan Commission is familiar with conservation subdivisions, but this page just shows examples taken straight from sewer pack design examples. The top is all existing traditional subdivision designs, and the bottom is the same kind of tracts of land utilizing a conservation subdivision. So the key part of the conservation subdivision is really retaining existing environmental features, a certain percentage of open space, and really helps to retain a rural character along major roadways within our rural preservation district and not allow for additional development along immediately adjacent to, I should say, roadways within the rural preservation district.
Craig, if I could jump in.
Please.
I'd just like to point out that this concept of the conservation subdivision approach in the rural preservation area is something that we did discuss back in February and before that in January. We threw it out there as a concept. We didn't get a lot of feedback at that particular time, but we certainly will need and want your feedback going forward, because it does represent a fairly significant policy shift. For those of you who aren't aware, before this plan was adopted, the village did have a policy that pertained to the areas generally north of Freistadt Road, allowing development, residential development at a 1 per 20 density, and that was changed to 1 per 5. And as part of this plan, what we're suggesting is that we retain the 1 per 5, but only if the property owner pursues the conservation subdivision approach, which would include a mandatory minimum open space requirement of some percentage of the total area, and also enforcing both minimum and maximum lot size requirements for that particular development. As Craig mentioned, the 1 per 20 really would just apply to any individual land divisions or lot splits that would be proposed outside of a comprehensive approach like the conservation subdivision design approach. So again, a significant policy shift, but something that's purely intended to help us retain our rural appearance and character in the rural preservation area, that you will notice has grown in its extent based on feedback from the Plan Commission since February. So with that, keep that in the back of your head and jot some notes down and let us know what you think. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And yeah, again, to reiterate, while I'm presenting and maybe even will misspeak as far as any sort of decisions, this is very much a draft, desiring and needing Planning Commission feedback and subsequent community input yet. So anything that we're proposing here or presenting tonight is really for discussion purposes to continue to move forward with this draft. Thank you, Jeff. The next district that we just want to give an overview of and have more discussion tonight is the Holy Hill Gateway Corporate Park District. So this area as well is up for discussion as far as the boundary. You'll see the boundary that we're proposing as part of this is in addition to the TID boundary, which is essentially kind of the outline that I'm making right now with my cursor. And the discussion has been, and the thoughts is with an increase to the sewer service area, mainly to the north and to the east, that potential for expansion for this industrial type use could make sense in areas that are identified on this map here. So the intent for the future use here would be industrial uses are preferred for this district, along with commercial and hospitality uses that have visibility from the freeway. And again, to kind of give, a summary, this is ongoing exhibits that are being drafted as part of the sewer service study area and conversations that have been had with Village of Richfield. But if you focus primarily just on the red outline here, this is the boundary, which I'm sure you're all aware that has been discussed for, again, this expansion of sewer service area. So when we look back and kind of toggle back and forth as far as, potential future uses, being industrial, commercial within this boundary, one of the factors that was staff consideration along with the consultant was this future sewer service area.
Yes, Craig, could I jump in real quick?
Yes.
Could you go back one more slide, please?
Mm-hmm.
You'll notice, as Craig indicated, the Gateway Corporate Park District has the extent has expanded since our original representation on the NDC map. The original boundary was effectively the original TIF district boundary, as Craig pointed out. But in light of the expansive sewer service area that resulted from the extension of utilities northward along Goldendale to serve the Gateway Corporate Park area, that sewer service area, as Craig shows on the next slide, is quite extensive. And in an effort to not effectively waste the capacity of that particular area, there has been discussions. We even discussed about it at one of our last meetings. Was this notion of expanding the Gateway area beyond the original TIF boundary as part of our 2050 plan to show where ultimately that corporate business park use area could expand, along with higher intensity and density of residential uses around the corporate park area, that in this map would occur in the what's shown as the rural transition areas, depending upon whether water and sewer is available at the time development is proposed. So with that, I guess we'll move on into the rural transition area.
Yeah, and this is the last slide that I have, just for in case plan commissioners are wondering when they can jump in with comments. So the final district that we just wanted to highlight as part of our discussion here tonight was what we're defining as this rural transition district. And right now the map kind of shows this as three kind of individual geographic areas. This is still kind of a work in progress, but the basic sense of the rural transition district, as Jeff mentioned, is the desire for this to accommodate slightly higher densities from a residential use due to the expansion of the sewer service area, and the fact that it's also adjacent to existing development, either in this case to the south and recent Renwood neighborhood development, in the central area again, increased density and uses as kind of a transition from the industrial uses, and then the rural transition here again as a transition to the north, to the rural preservation district north of this pocket here. So as a draft, what's being discussed as far as what uses would be desirable here is, if it is any residential uses, there's a kind of a breakdown of whether it's within sewer service area, which is note 2, and then note 3 references outside of sewer service area. And the main difference there is potential density that we would enact or allow, which is a slightly higher density in both cases than what's existing today north of Freistadt. So with that, I think that's a high level and very quick overview. It's a lot of content, obviously, since you've looked last. So while we've highlighted specific neighborhoods and districts and corridors tonight, definitely are receptive to any overall comments or questions on how the NDC will work. or just any general feedback to help us continue to fine tune the NDC. I'll turn it over to the chair, maybe.
Okay. There we go. Okay. Commission members, is there any, we got a couple of questions. One is one from me. Jeff, you answered that. Okay. So question I had was the sewer service area. I was wondering why we are reaching the Richfield area instead of reaching farther north in Germantown. And we got back with R.A. Smith analysis of the topography where the sewer service area boundaries reflect what sewer flows could accommodate by gravity.
Yeah. But first, let me preface any further comments by saying I am not an expert in sanitary sewer service topics, and maybe others on the Plan Commission have better, more information and knowledge than I certainly do. But given the sewer facilities that were extended north on Goldendale and east, or I'm sorry, on west on Holy Hill to serve the Gateway Corporate Park area and immediate surroundings, given its depth and also the topography of the surrounding area, that solid red line represents the area within which development could generate flow that would travel by gravity could flow by gravity to the existing system in Goldendale and in Holy Hill Road, as it may be extended by additional laterals and such throughout that area. Now, to answer your other part of the question, yeah, you can see that the solid red line extends west of 41 into the village of Richfield. And why, if that red line was essentially a balloon, I think your question might be, if we squeeze the Richfield side of the balloon to its nothing, why wouldn't that bulge out on the Germantown side to allow us to incorporate a larger geographic area, including to the north, from which the system could serve additional development? Well, the answer is the geography, the topography. Now, that isn't to say that additional area in Germantown abutting or just beyond the solid red line couldn't be served. It could with lift stations and that sort of thing. But this particular boundary and the analysis that was done by R.A. Smith earlier in the year was done for purposes of representing what could flow by gravity.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. So it is a best effort line. It is not an absolute line. There are ways to accommodate other areas of Germantown with additional infrastructure. This is just the area that will be served without excessive infrastructure, the lift stations. Okay.
I think that's a fair representation of things, yes.
Okay. Committee members, are there any questions of the committee? Are we talking about tower service? That is part of the sewer service area, in that our water tower has the capability of reaching out into Redfield. And at the last village board meeting, the village board accepted a payment from a resident to increase the height of the tower so it could serve property in Richfield. But the village board has not need to provide water there yet, specifically because we don't know what we're doing with this area. So we didn't want to give up water that we may need in the future. So, yes.
David, I just quick question for clarification. Did the board accept the donation, if you will, to provide a beefier concrete base upon which a taller tower could be constructed?
We agreed to accept that contribution had to be in our hands by the end of the week, a couple of weeks ago. I have not heard if we got the money or not.
Okay, but it wasn't to actually build the taller tower. It was just to have accommodate the extra concrete in case the tower is the height is enlarged at some point down the road.
That is correct.
Okay.
So they're only going to build a 135-foot tower, I believe the height is. But if you cut the stem in half, lift up the bulb, you can insert a new stem in there to make the tower taller. Peter, I would support the proposed approach to lot sizes and conservation subdivisions for the rural preservation district. Let's go ahead and jump back to that. I would agree with that. Back one, go forward one, go back one, slide before just what you had on. That showed the difference. Yes. Okay. There are a couple of people who were not involved in this discussion a couple of months ago, several months ago. Does everybody understand what the rural conservation approach is? Any questions coming up? No, please explain. Okay. Rural conservation, if you, on the slide that's on the screen right now, the three upper images are conventional subdivision platting. We take all the land, 20 acres, 30 acres, we divide it up into parcels, and we sell off all the land to individual people. You have your parcel, that is your parcel to do with, nothing else happens. In the lower images, what is done there is the developer comes in and wants to develop 30 acres of land, but he puts it in his conservation group zoning, which means that he can have a similar density, but he has to limit the residential units to a smaller area. So take the two center pictures, the big yellow one at the top and the one with the small yellow at the bottom. It's the same number of houses, but this plan leaves all this other open space accessible to the general public, and it keeps it open for forever, for the future, so that people driving by or driving through the area can see what farmland was and still is. Whereas the top image, all the farmland is gone. There's no open space anymore. It's just lot on top of lot on top of lot. Okay? Is that a good enough explanation?
Yep, I think that's a great
Can I ask a
explanation.
question on that?
There's a question on that?
Can I ask-
Okay.
Yeah, on the, I like the idea of the conservation subdivision. Who owns that land outside of the homes? Is that a part like of a homeowners association?
Yes, typically it is owned in common by the individual property owners through their homeowners association.
Okay, thank you.
So much like in Woodland Hills, south side, there is a pond in there. The homeowners association owns that pond, and is required responsible for maintaining that pond. In that same format, the homeowners association would own all of this adjacent farmland in common, and they would be responsible for taking care of that farmland. Okay,
The covenants or something like that, that the land has to be maintained as farmland, be taken over by invasives, something that's contemplated for the use of that land.
Yes. In many cases, as part of the original subdivision design, the common area includes features such as walking trails or other features that are available for use by the residents, sort of passive recreation, in some cases active recreation, whether they be little pocket parks with play equipment or just a place for people to go and fly a kite or have a little picnic.
Cool, thanks.
okay, going down a list of questions. Does the plan contemplate trouble areas like along County Line Road west of Appleton Avenue, where retail is just becoming vacant buildings? Perhaps more flexible zoning such as warehousing. So west of Appleton Avenue on County Line Road, down in the neck of the woods. Yeah, across from Fleet Farm.
So let
Jeff,
me,
you have an answer for that?
I'm pulling up our table here. Just give me a minute here. Where if we zoom in, so the area that's being discussed, I believe, is within the County Line Road district. It's very blurry right here, but this is Appleton, and then County Line is the bottom of the municipal boundary. So we're looking kind of at this lower area, the Fleet Farm, Menards, Walmart area. So within that County Line Road district, at least right now as a draft, if we go again, so it's the second line here, County Line, Highway Q, Commercial District. And within that, right now, we're describing that desirable is commercial and allowable is all these other uses. And to give your specific example, right now it's listed as industrial undesirable. So a conversation for tonight, is this something that we change industrial to allowable as kind of a general statement, and then within kind of the narrative, which isn't filled in here, but the narrative description could talk about adaptive reuse of vacant large format retail or different, that's the type of industrial that's desirable, or is it more just generic, any type of industrial? I guess, Tony, any initial thoughts or plan commissioners on what would be allowed within that area?
My thought would be industrial would be undesirable, but distribution, or we'll call light distribution, might be the way to go to find some highest and best use of those buildings, which I think retail is no longer highest and best use.
So
Yeah.
go ahead,
I
Jeff.
think I was just going to say I think it's a good concept and something we certainly do need to consider. In that particular area, I think one of the challenges is simply access. Having gone to those two centers on County Line west of the Applebee's, getting in and out just in a standard vehicle is a little bit challenging, given the topography and the way the driveways are constructed. So converting that for regular, truck traffic coming in and out might take some modification, but certainly something that we should consider doing.
But I also think you have to look at the neighboring uses, because talk about that one. Does Applebee's want to be, should be right next to a industrial building? That's where I have a hard time drawing those kind of connections.
Well, I was going to say what Applebee's, I think you mean is Chili's, but yeah, if you go on further west from there, what would happen if one of those larger stores, I can't remember the names of some of them, but if one of those
Michael's.
larger stores, yeah, Michael's. What if Michael's became vacant and it changed into light assembly or something like that? How does that affect the ability for the other stores? If another one becomes empty, would a retailer then not really want to go there because of some like light assembly in there or light manufacturing?
And that is the problem, is once you start to change a use, it will impact the entire area. So if I look at the screen now, the Dollar Tree store, if you put a light industrial use in the Dollar Tree, that's going to impact the rest of that mall's ability to re-tenant those spaces.
That's what I'm thinking too. So I think it's kind of like we say a slippery slope, isn't it? It may take care of a situation temporarily, but long term, if the plan is for retailing, it almost has to stay that way. Or completely change the area.
And then it's not, you can't do spot zoning. I can't say Dollar Tree, you can go to industrial. I really have to take all these strip centers from Michael's all the way down to Christopher Banks, and I have to say, you can be industrial now. This will now become an industrial zone.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you though, it's not working as retail, and I don't think it's going to work as retail anytime soon. That's a troll area. I mean, it's a bit too far.
So, if I can interject, I think potentially a solution would be that your table would reference industrial as allowable, but you as a plan commission, just because it says allowable use doesn't mean you have to say yes to any sort of rezoning application. What you would factor in is exactly what we're talking about here, that there's existing retail that's either existing there, or that market conditions in the present day still reflect that there could be potential for retail. So, any industrial user that would come in, let's say for, the specific, one of the specific spaces, you would have power still to say no, because it would potentially harm the retail aspects. But, down the line, maybe that changes, and there for sure is more solidifying evidence that, no, we really need this to transition to industrial.
One of the things that went into the village's decision to require a conditional use permit for quote unquote big box retail back in the early 2000s was to give them the ability to require construction and design so that a large big box could be subdivided into smaller retail components if the larger store didn't make it. But certainly we didn't contemplate at that time, the fact that retail may vanish altogether in its brick and mortar format that we're so used to back in the early 2000s, and that we see, sort of under duress right now. So I think the adaptive reuse question is something we're going to need to address across all of our non-residential areas or districts.
I think one problem we have to face as we do this on a night like tonight is to think about the situation we're in now. There is a change in the way people are buying products. Retail is not quite as into quite the same favor as it was. But understand, we're in a year when a lot of people like us, we don't really go to stores anymore. We do everything by delivery, but that isn't the norm. That isn't going to be here next year. At least I got my fingers crossed that it won't. So it's kind of tough to make the plan based on what we're seeing today.
I would argue this is years. Like at Bay Shore Mall, that thing opened up in what, 2006. I thought it was a great property. It was functionally obsolete the day they turned on the electricity. It's been going downhill.
That's a reasonable point. It is. But that's
However, when
that's
you
a different
look
kind of
at
focus.
when you look at Bayshore Mall, what are they retrofitting it with? They're not retrofitting it with industrial. They're retrofitting it with a complementary use to the area. So they are doing more and more residential in there and some smaller box retail instead of
Yep.
large box retail.
Yep, true.
So
You know,
in this area, the County Line Road District, do you want to put industrial next to the residential or next to the retail, or do you want to put another use that's more complementary to it?
Well, I'll say this, that earlier last year, we were approached by a property owner with a commercial building in one of our commercial corridors, asking that very same question, suggesting that he's struggling to retain tenants, and would the village entertain him redeveloping just a part of his property with a high density residential, given its hand in hand compatibility with the adjoining commercial and the ability to create sort of this pedestrian oriented mixed use area. That is something that we're basically saying we would like to develop. So maybe residential is if not industrial, is something that we would need to consider as well.
Possibly.
I think Tony and Craig, they hit on it. I think that you got to leave it open. Just because it's an acceptable use doesn't mean that we have to approve it at the plan commission level in the future. But at least it gives you the ability to make changes that you see fit in the future.
Well, the question would be, what is the hierarchy of acceptable uses there? Would you rather have residential or would you rather have industrial there? Or you really don't care, either one is acceptable to you?
That's a tough question. I think it's hard to tell without seeing a plan of what someone's proposing. But
okay, so then that rate, any use should be deemed acceptable? Or are we going to put limits on what is even acceptable?
I think you have to put limits on what is acceptable. It's hard to say. I don't have the table in front of me for the county line district, but I just think that Tony had a good point about the retail being gone, and I don't think it's coming back. I mean, even though it's been a crazy year, I think that trend's going to continue into the future. We could be wrong about that, but I don't think we are.
I would think I would take David's point. You'd want to nudge it towards residential, service, entertainment, some type of venue that's more complementary to the area than going hardcore and industrial, which again, in some of these buildings, at least in maybe more urban markets, is companies like Amazon want to use them as distribution nodes or things like that. So long term, the market will tell us what it wants there. I don't think we're going to be able to predict it today, but I think it is important, as Jeff pointed out, to keep the flexibility in the plan so that we're not kind of hamstrung down the road when we want to use some other adaptive use that we can't do it because we've locked ourselves in.
Yeah. So if you look at the chart now, what it deemed acceptable here is residential, multifamily, and senior, mixed use commercial residential, mixed use commercial and industrial. Commercial is desirable. Institutional is acceptable. Open space recreational is acceptable. The only one I would question is mixed use commercial industrial. And is that the Amazon last mile distribution center? It's small vans just going to Menominee Falls and Germantown. Something like that I could see being acceptable there. Okay.
Yeah,
Anything else on this area?
I think the discussion exactly that's happening now, I would envision it if a proposal would come forward. These are the things that you're discussing, from a place base and from a character base. Is this harming, future place that is this county line road district? Is it making sense? What type of industrial use is appropriate for this area that still is going to be of best benefit for Germantown and the surrounding properties? So, I think potentially what's laid out here makes sense. And what I would ask, following this meeting, if there's specific types of, industrial or residential or commercial that people think are more appropriate for different areas, those are types of feedback that can help craft then the narrative or the description that staff is working with the consultant to create right now.
Okay. All right. Any more comments about this area? I will jump back to the chat line here and the open space. This is going back to the rural preservation district. But the open space is owned by the subdivision. Yes, that is correct. So how many houses would be on a 40-acre lot? Jeff answered that down below, that there would be about 8 lots on 40 acres. So it would be like
the subdivision. Yep.
Subdivision. Yes, similar, but even more open space and smaller lots. It's very much like Winston. How would you protect the wetlands? Wetlands can be protected in any way. We can prohibit any development on them. Generally, you cannot develop on or in the wetlands. You cannot develop within 25 feet of the wetlands. I think those are the regular rules that we have, aren't they, Jeff?
Yes, and typically a wetland area would be required to be put in an open space outlot, whether it be a conservation subdivision or just a general subdivision under our current subdivision regulations. I would suggest this, if you recall back when the Saxony Village project was approved, the board made a change to the zoning code as it pertains to the calculation of lot count and density with respect to any floodplain, wetland, or other unbuildable portions of property. Effectively, that change eliminated the ability to get credit, if you will, for additional lots for any areas in floodplain or wetland. Under a conservation subdivision approach, that sort of density bonus, if you will, by getting credit for land in wetland or floodplain, is sort of a cornerstone feature of those regulations that in a lot of cases help encourage developers and property owners to pursue that type of development. Right now, we really have kind of a disincentive built in, given how we've hamstrung ourselves to allow the use of floodplain and wetland areas in the calculation of lot count. I think that's another question we would probably want to reconsider if we really make a push toward encouraging the conservation subdivision approach. The other option would be to follow the lead of some other communities and simply make conservation subdivision design a mandatory requirement for any future subdivision. That's, in the world of walk before you run, that may be something we consider further down the road, but certainly something we should consider.
my point was the conversation should happen now rather than having builders come in and just, build over anything, or they ask for additional footage like Renwood did to dump their dirt in a wetland area. When I think it was supposed to be 75 feet and they were going to dump within 25 feet of a wetland. I mean, all these exceptions on PDDs and I could be wrong, but we are jeopardizing the wetlands. I don't think that everyone on the board, maybe most people do, but maybe most don't, that the wetlands are protecting the water resources that we have. Not only the environment, the animals, but they are protecting our water. It's natural. So I think it should be, I think we should go in stricter than what we are. I think we kind of gave everybody a carte blanche that they can come in and put lots or homes wherever they want, and filling like they did across the street. I don't see where it's if you lived here and you heard all the dump trucks and how many feet of dirt they put in just to cover up some wetlands, it was phenomenal. So I think that the word conservation should be taken literally. That's the bottom line.
And I think that's where we're moving towards, but we got to start somewhere. And just by introducing the Rural Preservation District, we're starting to move towards that.
And
So
if I can just
do we need to change a law? Do we need to change a statute, a law?
what I would just add, if that's okay, is it likely is a two-step process similar to any comprehensive plan updates in different communities. Is your plan is kind of the guiding tool, and right now the recommended guide would be conservation subdivisions, as a desirable preferred site design. And then if that is, indeed the case, where there wants to be an ordinance, a more regulatory item, that would be an update to either your land division ordinance and or your zoning ordinance, where it could be kind of two different regulatory items that could be a recommendation within this comprehensive plan.
Okay.
I see a question. Would the conservation subdivision in a rural preservation district be RS1 zoning? Jesse responded, will likely need to create new zoning district for conservation subdivisions. If the lots are smaller than 2 acres, would horses be allowed? I think I would tend to think that in that area where I have all the open space, maybe in that open space is a place for the horses, but if a half acre apart, that's too close for a horse to be to a house. So that's where the new zoning requirements would have to come into play. Okay. All right. Anything else on the rural preservation district? One thing that I note is it's rather abrupt. You've got 3 areas that we call the rural preservation district, but they don't connect to each other. And I would think that's where we blend from anything to the rural. So there should be a solid border along the edge of rural preservation that is the transition area. I look at the area just north or just south of the town of Germantown, and I've got industrial up against rural preservation. Go to the right a little bit, down right there. that area right there, how do I transition from industrial down across the street and I've got rural?
Yeah, it's likely that as part of the changes to the zoning regulations, that we would require some sort of extraordinary buffer of some sort, either distance and or some sort of landscaping or other provisions that would provide some protection between the uses. Site planning would be helpful too as part of that process.
Okay. And then Jan, just, I am not sure if you are aware, but the darker green in the preservation area, that is all delineated wetlands or preservation.
Environmental corridor. It's either
Environmental
wetlands,
corridor.
floodplains, or wooded areas of 5 acres or more that are contiguous.
Mhm.
So all that area is going to be protected one way or another. So it's only in the lighter green that we can actually develop stuff.
Well, I would say this, that the environmental corridor boundaries shown on this NDC map reflect the sewer pack boundary for environmental corridors. And Craig, I don't know if you want to go back to that one slide you had that just showed the environmental corridors. You know, if you look at our current 2020 land use plan map, you'll see essentially the same boundaries for environmental corridors. And in the current plan, there was a policy that the village is going to develop some regulations to deal with development within those particular areas. And that just honestly just never happened. So the desire this time around is to essentially repeat the same policy, but come through and develop some actual specific regulations or provisions that deal with development that might encroach in or be upon those lands that are designated as environmentally sensitive. Whether it's structured, whether it's a primary environmental corridor versus a secondary or an isolated, and therefore there's sort of some sort of 3 tiers of protection, we'll have to look at that a little bit more closely.
Okay. So I'll give you something I had from my history is that nature centers. A nature center would probably like to build right on the edge of something like one of those zones because they want partly to be in it, engage in the sensitive area, but they can't put their building fully in it. And it's a building like that that's kind of a hybrid that I would welcome going into that wetlands area to help educate people and demonstrate the wetlands and work with the wetlands as opposed to keeping something like that 100% outside. So there is in my viewpoint, there is a special circumstance for building in or adjacent to wetlands that close.
Right. I would tend to agree with that. Another thing we need to consider, or let's look at the Harvest Hills subdivision. You remember they had essentially 3 40-acre parcels, 2 stacked one on top of the other, and then another 40 off to the west. And it was that 1 40-acre area off to the west that was predominantly wetland that was scattered throughout. And it was a struggle to get the developer to try and sort of dance around those wetland areas, only because we just didn't have the regulations in place beyond simply protecting the wetlands themselves. You know, we need to do a better job of trying to protect the areas that are outside of the actual wetlands, but it's situated in a way where we shouldn't allow development to take place because of the secondary effects once development were to take place.
Correct. And that's basically all we've done is prevented people from infringing upon the wetlands. So, okay. All right. Anything else on the wetland areas, wetland concerns? Let's go back to the larger map to finish talking about the rural transition district. That's where last time we had a meeting, that's where we really, Dean and I started really butting heads about it.
Well, you will notice that the rural preservation area has grown in the east central part of the village along Freistadt Road. Just north of that rural preservation area. It's about a half a mile. The area, the rural preservation area was extended about a half a mile south, and also to the east, a quarter mile into what's now neighborhood F, or the Woodland Ponds, Harvest Hills neighborhood. So
is that northern border of that zone there? Is that Freistadt?
Yes.
Okay, so you're staying south of Freistadt with all that.
Yes, and it jibes with the sewer service area expansion that was provided by way of the Renwood sewer utility extension.
Okay.
With the extension of sewer into the Renwood area through the Renwood development, as opposed to up Country Air Drive, the maximum extent of the sewer service area that could be served by that utility with a couple of lift stations is essentially the area shown as rural transition.
Okay. Tracy and Bruce, you still online there?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay. This area is basically where you're at, right?
Correct.
yeah, we believe, yep, looks like it.
Okay. So you're just south of Freistadt Road.
Freistadt.
You're on Freistadt Road.
Yeah, the corner of Country Air East and then head east 40
Right-
acres.
right through the R in rural and up, and you are to the right of that.
No, actually, you can see a white pole barn. Take where your cursor is. If that's
Right there.
that's our pole barn, and our house is to the left, right there. Yeah.
Okay. So your area is in this transitional zoning that we're trying to figure out what to do with you.
Right.
Okay.
So somebody comes into your neighborhood and says, I want to build another subdivision. You're not in the rural protective subdivision in the green. Another subdivision in your neck of the woods would be a high possibility.
That we would not like.
I
No.
remember all the meetings.
I should point out on that map that the 40 acres, or approximately 36 acres, that's located just east of the Bernardi property is actually owned by MMSD. And given the protective covenants associated with that area could actually be included in the rural preservation district, and probably should, as opposed to the rural transition. Just as we're talking here, it just makes more sense that way. But your point about additional subdivisions in the Bernardi neighborhood is true if you go to the west and to the south.
To the west.
Right. Correct. Okay. All right. And the MacArthur neighborhood is single family housing. I go across, and that's the Freistadt Road cutoff. That's always been the cutoff as long as I've been in this community. Anything north of Freistadt was 5 acres or more. let's talk about the Gateway corporate neighborhood, that business park there. What's the intent there? I can build an industrial building anywhere in this pink area. Right?
Yes, this is Craig. So right now, how it's laid out is very generic as far as industrial being desirable. What could happen is there different type of industrial that make more sense in different areas here? I think one thing that we brought up way back in January, February is, once you cross, north-south, is that Bonnywell? Not Bonnywell.
Rockfield?
Yeah, or Goldendale, is that the north-south?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, Goldendale.
Once you cross that, is it a smaller, square footage of industrial that's allowed, or a different type of industrial that would be a natural transition as well? So right now you have the large Briggs and Stratton, 500,000 or whatever it is, million square foot type industrial buildings that are appropriate in this area, but is that the same that you want to say is appropriate in this area, or is there different limitations, like I said, on either size of or type of industrial?
One of the things we have built into the 2050 planning effort is to take the NDC concept a little bit further with respect to a few of the districts, including the Gateway District, the Village Center, and the Country Air District, and that is to provide a little bit further conceptual detail of potential development scenario within that area that would show, whether it be with some sort of bubble diagrams or other your typical generalized land use plan for a sub area, is to take the Gateway Corporate Park and prepare a potential development scenario for the entire area, showing road extensions and buffer areas around the perimeter and future areas for different types of development, whether it be purely warehousing or industrial or even commercial for that matter. So that's one of the things we need to consider as well, that it's not intended that the NDC map is the point at which we just cut property owners or developers loose and say, go at it and tell us what you want to do and where. We want to have a further hand in refining the design, layout, and appearance of future land use within this particular area.
And from what I have been hearing, you've got a bunch of landowners that own 40-acre tracts of land that are waiting or planning for their retirement day, and they are looking to capitalize now that there is water and sewer in this area. And how do we engage them to say, you can build a warehouse, you cannot? You're across the street from one another, but sucks to be you.
Well, right now we've pretty much defined where you can by the extent of the existing water and sewer laterals in the ground. Certainly somebody just can't go and develop a part of the Gateway corporate area along Highway 145 just west of the town simply because it's in the purple area. I mean, yes, it happens to be within an area that could be served by water and sewer, but those facilities aren't in place. How the village wants to determine the timing of development within there is going to be an important consideration too. Historically, the village has let development determine the timing, and in most cases require development to play a role in financing the construction of those facilities. Now, lately, we've taken a more direct approach, proactive approach with our TIF districting to help, but it hasn't been carte blanche to any developer who wants to build in the purple area to just ask the village and we'll give them a handout and extend their utilities. That's something we're going to need to address going forward and how we want to time development within this area. Keep in mind, this plan is a sort of a 2050 build out scenario, and we're barely at 2020. So,
yeah, but at the pace we're going with this park, it's moving fast.
right, and I think the next logical step, if this plan were to be adopted with the no matter what shape the Gateway corporate area takes on the final NDC plan that's adopted, the next step would be to prepare that more refined concept plan for development that shows not only where and what type of development can occur, but what road extensions are going to be required, where the utilities can go, and how they logically can be extended within that area, and develop a real plan so we can make firmer decisions when individual property owners come forward and say, hey, I want to split off 5 acres for a house for my son, right across from the new water tower property. We want to be in a better position to deal with those requests than we have in the past.
So, Craig, let me ask you, the upper rural transition district on this map, the southern border of that is, I believe, in the rural transition district, that's single family housing. And it's going right up against the industrial, the Gateway Park. What is a good transition between single family housing and an industrial park?
The most common that you'll see just from a straight that use to the other use is more of a physical landscape buffer that you'll see. Now, is that the most desirable? I think that can be argued. I think what generally is more of a gradual transition is different types of uses that you could see, a non-industrial use potentially there. But I think to maximize also potential sewer service and capacity and build off the new identity and brand and market of this industrial corporate park, you do want to consider maximizing, available land for that industrial use. So as far as what the buffer would be, I think you would look at specific site design standards for berming and setbacks to those existing residential.
Okay.
In that particular case, David, if you go out there, you'll see that the southern boundary of that subdivision, and I forget the name of what it is, but it's been there for quite some time. It's got quite a significant forested buffer along that southerly property line already. And that was something that we discussed when we were first deciding on rezoning and approving the corporate park plans. So that can be, further increased, enhanced, if you will, on the south side of that borderline as part of whatever development might occur in that particular area. And I think that's where the detailed concept plan for the area really comes into play, where we've got to identify in a more specific location basis, what issues do we need to address? In this case, we need to buffer against an existing single-family development. Further to the west, that transition area, it's undeveloped and it's farmland. So again, once we get into the details of a sort of a conceptual development scenario for that area, we can try and address those things a little bit better than we can at this point, at this higher level of planning.
Okay, when does that level of detail get engaged?
Well, in fact, Craig, you help me out here? As part of our contractual arrangement, this was one of the areas that we identified as an area that we would have Grafe help us pull together a more refined concept plan for the area.
Yeah, and to respond, it's December into January. So these next 2 months is creating draft concepts. So it would be in early January that you as a plan commission would see some of these ideas.
Okay, and I am quickly losing faith in berms and planting to block sound from an industrial park. I'm getting all kinds of phone calls on the one south of me on Mequon Road. All kinds of noises coming out of there. So
I think and yeah, I hear that response and understand that. The question I guess I would have too, and maybe you have something already in mind, David, but there's already going to be, and there is industrial users here, large industrial users. So if it's not industrial users, I think potential alternative is additional residential that you could see within this area. And it's not a high density residential. It's more of a low to medium at best. So that low to medium is still going to be that potential residential use that will at one point be adjacent to industrial uses that are there today. So the question is kind of where does it stop? That's the question, with what's there right now and what the adjacent uses could be. I would urge that this is not high density residential because that's something that I think the village needs to focus more on the village center area to help support more of a destination pedestrian friendly experience and retail there. And then other commercial uses could be explored, I think, but specifically, in the area that we're talking about north of the road there between the rural transition, I think that's a difficult to sell for commercial uses there.
okay. Then the other area that we were really talking about is south and east on this. That 5-acre subdivision. Yeah, right through there, and protecting it from any more industrial because it's being sandwiched by industrial.
Yeah, so right now what's showing again is to the south and for sure to the mile north would be the rural transition district, which is not an industrial desirable or allowable use, that it's the residential uses that you would see as allowable to the immediate north and south.
Right now, if you look at the rural transition district slide, and I was going to say at the table at the bottom, but it doesn't include the details. Well, no, it does. Over on the left side. What we've are recommending at this point is that for the rural transition areas outside of the sewer service area, that development, residential development could occur at the 1 per 5-acre density. If it's split off with the 4 or fewer lots as part of a CSM, but could be higher at a 1 per 3-acre density with a conservation subdivision approach. And that would include essentially the lands south and east of Isabel Farms, that area that you were referring to, the 5-acre residential area.
Yep.
Now, for portions of the rural transition that are included in the sewer service area where water and sewer is available, the top portion of that graphic shows that we would allow 2.2 units per acre up to 3.5 units with a conservation subdivision approach. And that's essentially RS4 zoning, which is the 20,000 square foot minimum lot size, to the RS5 district, which is the 15,000 square foot lots. So that's what's proposed at this point with the conservation subdivision approach in the sewer serviced area of the rural transition. So what I would envision happening there is if we were looking at the land north of Isabel Farms, which is in the rural transition district, and it's in the sewer service area boundary, if development is proposed within there with sewer and water, that it would have to be a conservation subdivision approach to get that higher density, and we would require the design to include, that buffer area, the open space along that common border with the Isabel Farms development.
Okay. And the northern border of that with the gateway, is that Holy Hill Road there, the horizontal white line?
So this is an error on my part as Donnie and I were finalizing this map. The intent of our group was to say Holy Hill Road is the divider there, but it's showing actually up north more than what we wanted. So the proposal, at least right now, is that Holy Hill Road, north of Holy Hill Road, would be that Gateway Corporate Park, and that still does leave the 40-acre tract lands as a buffer between the Isabel Farms development right now.
Can you zoom in on that?
Yeah, and I apologize for the confusing nature of that. So
That's all right.
this map shows a little bit more, and
So the bottom of this black line here should be the white line. There you go. Okay.
Yeah, so more like that.
Okay, Matt, I'm going to pick on you.
Yeah.
This is your neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the neighbors here are going to like the plan, but I think all of us built our houses in the last 6-7 years, and since then we've just been swallowed up by industrial. So and even since the last time I saw this plan, it's the rural transition district has gotten smaller and the Gateway Corporate District has gotten bigger. So you're leaving a 40-acre field between the subdivision and the corporate district to the north, and then I guess that could all be filled in with 15,000 square foot lots, and the subdivision that we're in here right now is 200,000 square foot lots. So it's just, I don't know how that transition makes a lot of sense. I know how it makes sense to the village, I guess, but it doesn't make sense to anyone that lives here.
And I think drawing this in, to Jeff's point, is going to be a good help as well to assist in, is this the appropriate boundaries for the Gateway Corporate Park and this rural transition? Because a key part, again, within the rural transition district could be, again, the requirement for conservation subdivision, where although the lot size is 15,000 square feet, it essentially could require basically open space surrounding all that, where, the backyards here would still be adjacent to open space and not, a road with lots, every 80 feet, along the backside of Isabel Farms.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like in that rural transition district, you have, neighborhoods, the Isabel Farm subdivision, the subdivision up in the northwest corner that's by itself. And then you also have one over by Rockfield well, actually, that is a neighborhood. I thought that wasn't their neighborhood last time. You just have quite a few established subdivisions in there. So it's kind of interesting. I would have to look at the chart a little bit more to kind of figure out what types of developments are going to be allowed to go into these more established subdivisions. How you transition.
Matt, I would ask you to, give some thought to what you would recommend be allowed in the rural transition district. If what we're talking about currently is too dense, then, let's, I'd appreciate any suggestions you might have that we should consider.
Okay. I mean, I just think you said RS5, that seems to be a little bit too dense. We just went through a big thing with the neighborhood over by Kinderberg Park, and that was RS4 versus RS5. Now we're going up RS1 against RS5. That seems like a huge jump. I understand the conservation subdivision, a part of it. I guess I don't know what that means. Like if you had a 40-acre parcel, how many homes could you have on there, and how much of that acreage would be open space still?
Yeah, those details would need to be applied and factored in. Also any unbuildable lands under the current policy would affect the number of lots that could be developed. Those sorts of considerations need to be made as we go forward. But I would again ask you to consider what you think might be more acceptable in terms of a transition area, because that's what it is. Particularly as it applies to those areas that are served by water and sewer. I mean, one of the things we need to consider as a policy is how much of the infrastructure we put in the ground and the capacity that it provides. Ideally, are we going to take advantage of or not take advantage of as we allow development to occur within the service area boundary? I mean, on one end of the spectrum, arguably, we don't want to simply say all you can develop are 20-acre lots in an area that can be served by a sewer service. Or maybe we do. That would be a policy choice that would need to be made, and those sorts of considerations made in making those decisions.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you there. I will think about that a little bit more as far as what density seems more acceptable for that area.
It does seem a little, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for here? That development shouldn't be dictated by the size of the piece of pipe in the ground. I mean, but if you go by that, then it doesn't seem like the right way to go about it. There's got to be some middle ground there.
Can you go back to that image where you changed the boundary line a little bit ago? So our boundaries are always at roadways. And what if from Holy Hill Road north, the front 5 acres, that southern 5 acres of land, I halfway up, I can't draw on this, but if I go halfway up to the black line and draw a line across there, then that little portion at the bottom, something like that, that has to be a defined transition. That's got to be something that is going to blend the two together. I don't know what it is, but I look at the west side of Goldendale, and we got what's his name's house there, and what's down below that house. Those are a bunch of residential units.
Which area are you talking about?
Right above the cursor there, right there. What are you circling now? All
Oh,
that-
you mean the Wetterall property?
Yeah, his house is in there, and then south of Wetterall is what? Closer to the bottom, go
Horses
down.
and a wetland
A
and
second Wetterall house and then wetlands. Yeah.
Okay, so I got so much like that, not disappear. Okay, much like that. If I went from Goldendale Road west and picked up those two houses and said, "There's a transition zone. We want those. They can be residential." You got a couple of farmhouses up here on Holy Hill Road. Is there something that we can say that there's our transition? We have to be down to something in that space.
To answer, yes, there absolutely can be kind of written in within the neighborhood districts and corridors kind of narrative description, whether or not it's on the map. But what I think could be a solution is within a narrative description, as you say, properties fronting Holy Hill Road or properties adjacent to different districts,
Yeah.
that there's X design standard, whether it's a specific
250 feet, 500 feet of something distinguishable. I think that's part of that detailed plan that you guys were talking about.
Yeah, whether it's, a specific use or it's again just a specific design, landscape or setback type element or open space, those would be, things to consider. But, I like the idea, as one potential, is it within adjacent to Holy Hill or Goldendale that there's more of a smaller footprint, potential building, as an example, or specific type of use that's more of a transition.
Or as Jan's pointing out here, you got to dedicate that over to parkland and it's planted with trees and it's an amenity for the area. It's a buffer amenity. So, okay.
yeah, I think I like that idea. I don't know how feasible it is, but it seems like if something was set in there and you could just provide a little bit more richer of a buffer than what you see west of there on Holy Hill Road. I mean, you got the berms and everything, but they don't really provide much of a visual buffer. And I think that's okay over there because it's a different type of area right next to the interstate. But as you move across Goldendale Road on Holy Hill Road, it's a different feel, and there are a lot more. There's even residences on the north side and the south side of Holy Hill Road at this point. So
A good example to look at might be Mequon Road along where the business park is. The existing business park has a mandated 150-foot buffer area south of Mequon Road. If you picture the air gas property, and the buffer that's been provided in there between the berming and the rather significant amount of landscaping, plantings and such, is that I assume that's more of the type of buffer, Matt, you would find acceptable in the area we're talking about here.
yeah, I think it would make a big difference.
In my past, I would have agreed with that. But I'm listening to all these people just north of there complaining about the noise. That park is still generating substantial noise, and this is a extremely dense subdivision. Although some people say it's 5-acre lots, there are 1-acre lots in there.
Where are you talking? Over by the Germantown?
Friedenfeld neighborhood,
Okay.
right above the Germantown Business Park.
Mhm.
That neighborhood I'm getting complaints out of them about the business park. And it's a business that is down by the word district that is creating the noise. That's how far that noise is traveling.
Is it,
Is there any, this is kind of a little bit off subject maybe with this, but is there anything in the park and land use plan that is setting aside any types of lands for, recreation, or as things are being built and subdivided, a trail network? Is that part of this plan as well?
yes, so an emphasis of the 5-year, their 5-year court plans, there's a major emphasis and desire from the community for connecting existing parks via off-street trails as well as on-street or kind of sidewalk additions as well. The discussion has been had as well as far as new land for either a park or recreation facility, whether that's a outdoor sports field complex or similar type use. That might not be, an immediate priority, but the trails is definitely something that is being discussed with right now priority along Menominee River and how to potentially create trail systems for that.
Okay. Is there any other area that anybody wants to talk about? Matt, I think this area up by you, between Gateway Business Park, Rural Residential District, I think that needs some finite detail work, which will be coming in successive meetings here. But that's where I have most of my heartburn, is in that area.
Yeah, I think something good can be done there. Just needs to be thought out a little bit.
Okay.
This is very helpful, just as your consultant, to help kind of frame our diagramming that we're going to be doing moving forward for kind of future use here. So I appreciate this feedback. And as Jeff mentioned, after this meeting, we'll be sending out, this presentation so you can look a little bit closer at the table and what's allowed in the map. And if you have any, specific ideas, please share those so we can help include those as we move forward.
Okay. Any further discussion from anybody on any topic, any area related to the 2050 plan?
I'll just throw out there and reiterate what I said earlier. We'll be pulling together digital copies of the map and table and send those out to the Plan Commission members so you can take a closer look at all of the information. And we would ask that you provide some critical commentary and feedback going forward, so that when we come back together on the 14th of December as part of our regular Plan Commission meeting, we can bring this up and hopefully reach some closure on, if not the entire plan and map and table, but at least good parts of it as we move forward. Keep in mind, we're striving to pull together a quote unquote final draft for presentation to the public and posting on our social pinpoint site leading up to our mid-January community conversation meeting. This final draft is still a draft, and it's subject to further change. It's just something we need to pull together for purposes of taking to the public to get their overall review and a critical commentary as well.
Okay.
David, one quick question, okay?
Yes, sir.
Go back to the last topic we discussed and moving that boundary down to Holy Hill Road and the relationship to Matt's house. To give me a better feel about what we're talking about, Matt, are you in is it Isabel subdivision, or where are you actually?
Yeah, I'm in that subdivision. Yep.
Okay, all right. Then I know. Then that answers my question. I just wanted to kind of get a feel for, exactly what kind of transition we needed. So I didn't quite connect where you were. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'll bring this discussion to a close for today. Are there any announcements, Jeff?
I don't have any other announcements, no.
Okay, I have no announcements either, so I will adjourn the meeting at 8:18. Thank you all for attending, and we will talk to you soon.
Good night. Take
Good night.
care.
Thank you.
Night.
Thanks.